Afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. It has been a very busy end of last week, beginning of this weekend, now to the end of this weekend, but good afternoon again. Checking in to jump right into Exodus. For folks who've been kind of checking in and following along, this was the first time I didn't give like a heads up of when I would be checking in. That's only because got to prioritize all the moving pieces and parts happening with family. Also in celebration mode with my love. He is enjoying the boring day today. So I got some downtime. Want to do a quick check in before we get back to just kind of honoring how he want this day to be. For those that know us well, y'all know we're not like really big on birthdays, but we're never losing sight of making time for one another, glorifying God and everything He's blessed us with, and then going the extra mile when it comes to how we serve one another. When it comes to the new year. But anywho, good to be present with you all. If you hear some stuff in the background, I got my little ladies with me doing their own thing, but they wanted to be in the same space. So shout out to them for wanting to continue to hear mommy. They know how the weekends are with certain days, specifically Saturday, right, y'all? Saturday when we do our through the Bible or watching a Bible story. Shout out to YouTube where I find all the things to get them to see and learn, and then me read what the word says to kind of fact check some things because we love animation stories, but oftentimes they don't necessarily tell the truth the way it is written, but they do tell it in a way that I'm assuming they felt was easy for little people to comprehend and then remember through storytelling and songs and things of that nature. But anywho, back at it again. We're now in the book of Exodus. For folks who know me, I'm the new King James Version, 1611 edition is where I've been reading and learning from. But starting with chapter 1. Side note, if I jump into chapter 1, y'all, as you continue to have questions, I appreciate the text messages, the direct messages, the Facebook messages, the questions, the comments. Y'all can share that like in the live. I always circle back just to honor that and have ongoing conversations offline about different things that have also stood out for you all or just different things y'all came into the knowledge of learning for the first time as a result of just listening in. So I don't want to lose sight of that. But chapter 1, Exodus 11. Chapter 1 of Exodus. What I highlighted was verses 12 through like 17. But what you'll notice for folks who read chapter 1, you'll notice that there is a recap of Jacob's son. So Abraham, then Isaac, and then Jacob. And then we just wrapped up with the details of Jacob's son, his beloved or his favorite son, Joseph, and how he was captured and enslaved, taken into Egypt, and how it ended up being God's will despite the suffering, the enslavement, to where he was able to go back for his people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, and then protect them, look out for them, make sure that they had food and basic needs met during a famine that God had revealed to him in a dream would be 7 years long and severe. So now we're in Exodus, and that very first chapter, there's a recap of who Jacob's sons are. So all 12 of the sons. And then we get into the interesting piece that makes Exodus verses 1 through 21. But again, I specifically highlighted verses 12 through 17. So I'll read some of it. But my ultimate takeaway was throughout the Bible, this is the theme. So God's people multiplying and then prospering and other folks fearing what this means. So they end up trying to uproot the Hebrews and then enslave or subject them to maintain power. So when we think of the other folks, because we understand mankind, human race is all one, but when we think about other folks, it's important to know that other folks are folks who have decided not to follow God, decided not to understand and have a relationship with God based on how He designed things to be. And we can get into that story, at a later date. But it's all family, but people sense making and what they do to honor God or not honor God is where the differentiation comes when I say other people, right? So I'm gonna start with verse 6 and read through. But verses 1 through 5 is just a recap of who are the children of Israel. I'm starting with Jacob's children. And then verse 6 reads, "And Joseph died, all his brothers, and all that generation." So all 12 have now passed. Verse 7, "But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them." So y'all remember, they are now in the land of Egypt based on the severe famine that occurred that caused them to have to leave the land that was promised to them, which is the land of Canaan and that entire surrounding area. So Joseph sent for his family, and they are now living in Goshen. So Egypt, not Egypt. It's almost like when you think of if your city is Snellville, the city of Conyers or the city of Tucker, but it's all in the same county of Gwinnett County, if that makes sense, right? That's for my Georgia folks. But that's verse 7. They grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. Verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph. So we know Egyptians definitely didn't do a good job speaking or orating the history because new king, you don't know nothing about Joseph. Now that could be willful ignorance or that could be legit. The story of who Joseph is and was in his household was not something widely known. Verse 9, and he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we." Verse 10, "Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." Verse 11, "Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramesses." Verses 12, "But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel." So Pharaoh told his people, the Egyptians, hey, they're growing mighty. I'm afraid of if these wars break out, they're going to become allies with our enemies and they're just going to take over. We can't have that. So let's go ahead and enslave them, treat them harshly so that we can kind of keep them under our rule and thumb because I'm uncomfortable with how many they are and how they are owning the space that they occupy. Now, despite the affliction, what we learn? We learn that they are continuing to prosper and to grow in number, right? So that's what it says in verse 12 and then verse 13. "So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor." So now it's hard work, y'all. Verse 14, "And they made their lives bitter with hard bondage and mortar and brick and in all manner of service in the field. And their service in which they made them serve was rigor." Verse 15, "Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of one was Shiphrah and the name of the other Puah." And 16, "And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew woman and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live." Verse 17, shout out to the midwives. "But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive." Now, I'm going to get to 21 so y'all can understand how the midwives did not have to suffer the consequences of ignoring what they were told by the taskmasters. So, verse 18, "So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive?" Verse 19, "And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them." Verse 20, "Therefore God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very mighty." And verse 21, "And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that He, this is God, provided households for them. So that is exactly why the verses that I highlighted to y'all, 12 and 21, stood out. And the theme I read about everything in the Bible goes back to Him saying, be fruitful and multiply. God's people being obedient and prospering. And then the other folks, or folks who are not followers of God or are disobedient, wanting to do their own thing, fearing what this means. So constantly trying to subject them to whole power to do things their way versus God's way. But God already has a plan, right, in His design. So that's what stood out to me for chapter 1. I highlighted 12 through 21, but if you want to know about the lineage, the history of Isaac to Abraham to Isaac, Jacob's seed of 12 sons, that's the beginning of verses 1 through till you get to the verses I just read aloud. So I put in parentheses, like, as folks continue to read and or learn, another theme I've noticed is the gift to interpret dreams. So Joseph was one of the ones we most recently read and learned about, having the gift to interpret and understand dreams and visions. Abraham also had dreams and visions and understood and trusted God's way of communicating with him in that manner and in other ways, as far as like physical signs he could see with his eyes, through God coming in the appearance of man, and all of those really cool ways in which God showed Himself up to this point. So, chapter 2, what stood out to me was particularly verses 1 through 10, and my highlight was growing up. The animations when I was growing up as a kid showed a different beginning of Moses in a basket floating down a riverbank, right? So now I'm reading for myself to learn and know for myself, right? And this is what I learned in 1 through 10. So, like, what actually happened, right? So, chapter 2, verses 1 through 10 reads, and a man of the house of Levi went and took as wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it with asphalt and pitch, put the child in it, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, so she's coming from out the bulrushes where she was watching to see what was going to happen, shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him. So now Moses is back with his mom being nursed. Last verse, verse 10. And the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, because I drew him out of the water. So that little piece stood out to me just because, again, for years I've read and remembered and recall like the dramaticism of folks are coming in and like ripping baby boys to and under out of their mom's hands, right? And then of course it's children animation, so they're not showing what they're doing, but we know they're killing the babies, right? So you know how movies start. But they busting in homes, they snatching them out the marketplace, like wherever they see women with boys, like they checking on raveling babies to get confirmation by looking at genitalia. Like this is the movies I remember growing up as a child. And then Yoheved, which is Moses' mom's name, she gets news, right? So she freaks out, she gets some things, and then she put Moses at the beginning of a river. She's running, right? And then she pushes him down like in this little basket, like a little bread basket. And she's weeping and she's crying. And then little mama, her daughter, is like following. Because, that's how the animation is. She's following because she's like, oh my gosh, like my brother, like what's going on? But mom's like, make sure the baby okay. Like, make sure the baby don't drown. And like, lo and behold, We see Pharaoh's daughter out like washing near the riverbank, and then she hears the baby already crying, right? So she goes like, "What's going on, y'all?" And then she sees the baby, instantly falls in love with the baby, and then it fast forward to like him being a little prince in Egypt. So it skips a lot of those details. But I love reading and seeing that for myself in 1 through 10. And then the other thing that stood out in chapter 2 was verses 21 through 25. Now, with 21 through 25, my initial thought was, God forgot? I'm always thinking, right, based on what I'm reading. Then I remember how the first 5 books were written by Moses. So the first 5 books of the Bible that folks call the Torah, depending on culture customs, right? The Torah, and how God operates. So even if he did forget, right? Because we're talking about God, he kept and still keeps his promises. So that's what came to me when I read chapter 21, verses 21 through 35, which reads, verse 21. Then Moses was content to live with the man, and he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. So the man is Zipporah's father, for folks who haven't read the beginning of chapter 2. Moses kills an Egyptian because he was overwhelmed with compassion and frustration for how that Egyptian, like the taskmaster, was treating his people. And the way chapter 2 reads, Moses knows he's Hebrew, right? So he has that empathy for how his Hebrew brother is being treated. Now Moses looks to the left and right, make sure nobody sees what he's about to do, because Moses knows, nah, like I have to take his life because he doesn't have to treat this person this way. And it's getting to me. He's about to beat this man to death, right? So Moses kills the man. And then, like the following day or later on in the day, Moses sees his 2 Hebrew brethren fighting with each other. He was like, man, why y'all acting like this? Like, who was wronged who, and why are you acting this way? And then one of them said, what? You gonna kill us like you killed that Egyptian? So Moses freaks out because in his mind, he thought nobody saw what he did. He thought he checked the scene before he killed the man who was about to kill his people, right? So he gets afraid because his own person now is like, oh, wait till we know. And he's like, wow, if you know, I don't even know who else all knows. So I gotta get up out of here, right? So he runs for his life, and then he finds himself in a different part of the land, and that's where he meets who ends up becoming his wife, Zipporah. So when it reads verse 21, the man, like, then Moses was content to live with the man, they're talking about Zipporah's dad. So I said all of that just to get to that point. But he gave Zipporah, his daughter, to Moses. So marriage is happening. Verse 21, and she bore him a son. He called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a foreign land. Verse 23, now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. When I read that, I thought about old school song that says, when praises go up, blessings come down. How God's ears is always open to his people, either praising, worshiping, and or crying out. So verse 23 says that, now it happened in the process of time that the king of Egypt died. Then the children of Israel groaned because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry came up to God because of the bondage. Verse 24, so God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Verse 25, and God looked upon the children of Israel, and God acknowledged them. So that goes back to my initial question, was like, God forgot, like what? But understanding God's plan, God's design, right? But he acknowledged their cries after all of that time, right? So that's what stood out to me there. And I told y'all about the side note. Now, what you'll see about the man who gave Moses Zipporah, who ends up becoming his wife, the man has 2 names in the Bible. Why? I don't know. But the first time we see his name is Ruel. Then the second time we see the name we know, which is Jethro. And I say we know based on like my family and the stories we learned, all the way to the coloring pages and the Bible story animations. It was Jethro. It wasn't Ruel. But they are one and the same, in case you keep looking from like verse 18 and then jumping to like chapter 3 verse 1, trying to figure out like, she got 2 daddies? No, it's the same person. So that's what stood out, and I just wanted to acknowledge that Ruel and Jethro, same person. So chapter 3 is one of my faves. I'm sure it's one of everybody's faves. I wrote, read it all, like repeatedly. But chapter 3 and 4 are powerful to me. What I'm going to do is like honor like why it's so powerful. So now we know Moses ran away. He is now with Zipporah. He has had a son, one, Gershom, with Zipporah. And then verses 2 through 22, I felt like was worthy to read all. But this is when God reveals himself to Moses. And this is what when we learn about the who Moses is on a deeper level, and then how Moses receives reassurances based on how he feels and where he feels inadequate. So, verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. Verse 4. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. Verse 5. Then he said, Do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Verse 6. Moreover, he said, this is God speaking, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. Verse 8. So I have come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Y'all behave. To the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Verse 9. Now therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel has come to me, and I have also seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. Verse 10. Come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. Verses 11. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? Verse 12. So he said, this is God, I will certainly be with you, and this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So this is Mount Horeb, where he sees the burning bush. God revealing himself through a burning bush that is not being consumed by fire. Right? And he's saying, this is how you're going to know it is what it is. Then Moses said to God, verse 13, Indeed, when I come to the children of Israel and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they say to me, What is his name? What shall I say to them? Verse 14, and God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Verse 15, moreover, God said to Moses, Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is my memorial to all generations. Verse 16, Go gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, The Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared to me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen what is done to you in Egypt. Verse 17, And I have and I will bring you out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 18, Then they will heed your voice, and you shall come, you and the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, The Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Verse 19, But I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go, no, not even by a mighty hand. Verse 20. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst, and after that he will let you go. Verse 21. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, and it shall be when you go that you shall not go empty handed. Verse 22. But every woman shall ask of her neighbor, namely of her who dwells near her house, articles of silver, articles of gold, and clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. So, powerful chapter. I read everything except for verse 1. I know that depending on how you learned the story, you may or may not have seen how they did not leave empty handed. They left with more than enough. And God already knew that they would not be let go easily. So he said, watch me show up and show out through these wonders. Because I already know Pharaoh is not going to just let y'all go, right? And then into chapter 4, which is definitely a read all, but I'll focus on 11 through 17 for the sake of time. This is when we see how Moses essentially acknowledges his concerns based on how he shows up and what he knows or perceives to be an impediment. And old school folks that know the stories, like Moses stuttered, right? So that's why his right hand man, when we talk about my right hand man, was his brother Aaron. So you get to read and see when Moses tells God, like, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, so show me how, and fast forward through verses 1 through, God is like, give me that rod. And then he allows the rod to turn into a serpent, right? And then he allows it to turn back. And then Moses still not sure. He's like, put your hand in here, take your hand out. And he sees it leprous, right? White as snow. Then he say, put your hand in there again, take it out. And it's back to his regular color. God is saying, like, I got you. Let me go ahead and reassure you by showing the miracles, my wonders, right? So that helped to alleviate Moses' concern to see in real time God show him, I mean what I say. You gonna do what I need you to do, but I'm gonna show up and do my part, right? So he gives him a lot of those pieces in chapter 4, verses 1 through 10. And then 10 is powerful to me because Moses acknowledges, I'm not eloquent. I don't know how to talk. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. Like, what you mean you want me to go before all these people and be your spokesperson, right? So that's where we transition into verses 11 through 17 that I'll read. But I highly encourage y'all read all of chapter 3, all of chapter 4, like really deeply to kind of see the full picture. But now Moses is still going back and forth, right? He needs reassurances. And verse 11 says, so the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Sound like a mama that's kind of tired of you trying to go back and forth because he already done told you what he told you, right? But verse 11. So the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? He said, I made it all, right? Verse 12. Now therefore, go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. Verse 13. But he said, Moses again, oh my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send. Verse 14. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses, and he said, is not Aaron the Levite your brother? I know that he can speak well, and look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. So God is saying, I'm not even just talking with you, talking with your brother who's a Levite. And for those who know in the very beginning, Levites are the special man priests of God, right? There's a whole holy of holies set up. And then you'll see more the further we read through. But he just said, I know you know who your brother is. If you don't, I already dealt with him. He's going to be so happy to see you. I got the plan. Trust me, right? So this is God dealing with Moses. And look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he will be glad in his heart. Verse 15. Now you shall speak to him and put the words in his mouth. And I will be with your mouth and with his mouth, and I will teach you what you shall do. Verse 16. So he shall be your spokesman to the people, and he himself shall be as a mouth for you, and you shall be to him as God. Verse 17. And you shall take this rod in your hand with which you shall do the signs. And that's verse 17. Now, Y'all saw what I read in 11 through 17. God is essentially saying, I am using you to speak what I say will happen to your brother Aaron, who will be obedient to what you say because he will see me working through you. He will see you as God. You are not God, but he will see you as God because I've already dealt with him, right? He's gonna be happy to see you when he actually see it coming to fruition, right? Because he's more than likely a praying man, keeping up with the customs of what Levites do, right, for the people, despite being a slave, right, in Egypt. So that was what stood out to me. Was chapter 4, and then the kicker for me is what I always used to kind of like do the whole back and forth with. But chapter 4 at the very end, verse 21 and then 29 through 31, I just wrote, God let Moses know he would harden Pharaoh's heart. Like he let him know. He let him know. But again, God's plan, purpose, and design, regardless of how we feel about it or what we think we know best. But verse 21 of chapter 4 said, And the Lord said to Moses, When you go back to Egypt, see that you do all those wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in your hand. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. I initially, as a little, a youngin back in the day, was like, but why? Why you do that, God? Right? But God wanted to prove I am that I am. My wondrous works are going to do what need to be done. I will be glorified for it, and my people will continue to be obedient. Whole funny story. And then go into the land of milk and honey, which I promised to them from the days of Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And I say haha because I've read, right, and I see that God did so many amazing things, and I mean, showed up, walked with us, talked with us in miraculous ways, and we still couldn't get it together. Why? We still couldn't get it together. But I digress on that. But verses 29 through 31, verse 29, then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. So they're being obedient. Moses done linked up with his brother. Aaron is overwhelmed, glad in his heart, because he's like, man, God done showed this to me in a dream. Like, it's happening for real, for real. You are my brother, right? Aaron wasn't even mentioned in the beginning. It was Miriam. And we'll learn more about who Miriam is and was, right? And then Jochebed, Moses' mom. But Moses' dad and Aaron were not mentioned. But we now know that they are Levites, right? So a special people who God set apart, again, to be in a unique relationship with God, far as how God ordained things to be when it comes to being in relationship and obedience. But anywho, verse 29 says, Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. Verse 30, and Aaron spoke all the words which the Lord had spoken to Moses. Then he did the signs in the sight of the people. Verse 31, so the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the children of Israel and that he had looked on their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. So it's about to get good, it's about to get hard, it's about to get real, but that's what we learned. God told Moses, I know Pharaoh not going to listen. Matter of fact, he's not going to listen because I will harden his heart. Right? But again, all for plan, purpose, design, beyond our questioning. I remember me, oh, like, why gotta do it like that? But plan, purpose, design. So the last thing, I believe that is the last thing because 5, nothing really stuck out with 5, but for those who like just love to read or want to learn and see for themselves, this is the first time that Moses encounters or meets up with the Pharaoh of that time. So that's what that is about. And it's a lot, but it's a good lot, if that makes sense. But anywho, appreciate y'all for continuing to tune in. I pray that God continues to show up and bless you all through whatever it is. I pray that you continue to have a desire, hunger to want to know more about him, fellowship with other believers, and find comfort in questioning. But ain't nothing like the Holy Spirit at the end of the day when you don't know it all or you are frustrated by some things. There'll be a peace that passes all understanding. But that's all I had. 1 through 5 was particularly 1 through 4 based on highlights. And again, check out 5. You'll see what that first interaction was like with Moses. Aaron definitely by the right hand side when he interacted with Pharaoh. Continue to make it a great day and an even better week. Take care, everybody. Bye.